Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good night, depending on where it is that you choose to join us today. My name is VOX AKUMA. It is a pleasure to be back, and today I'd like you to join me in this mysterious and rather desolate country home as we'll be reading some stories together. First of all, the most important thing that I need to say to all of you today is Merry Christmas. It's a fabulous time of year, and I have to say I am so proud of all of you for having made it through one of the most difficult years that surely many of you will have ever been through. It hasn't been easy. It's been quite a strange one, but a lot of you have lasted long enough to be here with me today, and that really is something to be proud of. It really, truly is. So, first of all, we have a few things that I should address. The first one being that super chats are now enabled. So you guys can feel absolutely free to send, if you'd like to send a donation, feel free to do so through super chat or through the Streamlabs link in the description. It is completely up to you. And in order to, one sec. I have the most delightful mug of peppermint tea with me today to make sure that my throat stays nice and what's the word? Every word I can think of sounds very weird, like slick. I don't know. How about just healthy? Staying healthy. I'd like all of you to do the same. If you aren't being hydrated, get a glass of water or a cup of tea or anything that helps you feel relaxed or healthy or similar. So super chats are coming in at a very fast rate today, and I feel so thankful that you guys are all being so generous. I'm thinking what we must do in order to actually progress with the ASMR is to read them at another time perhaps, but a lot of them I'm looking now are extremely generous, and I just want to say thank you all so much for everything you've said. It really does truly mean the world to me. So, after having done a bit of research, I have understood that copyright will not be an issue for the stories we're going to read today, and for this morning's stream, or this evening, or as I said, whenever you chose to join us today. For this morning, we will be reading some of the poems of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe, starting with perhaps his most famous, The Raven. This was published in sometime in the 1800s, which is quite bizarre that it still remains so relevant and so poignant today. So what I'll be doing is reading this story out as best I can. It's quite dramatic, and it's quite, what's the word? It's very wordy, but I think the lyricism here is absolutely fantastic. So, here we go. This is Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of one some gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly, I remember it was in the bleak December, and each desperate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to the still beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness here, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore?" Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least, I can never read this word right, not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is, on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl, to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." And then the bird said, "Nevermore." Started as the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken. "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird, bust, and door, and then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking "Nevermore." This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, To the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core, this and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er. But those velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretched, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quote the Raven Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempest sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the Raven Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the Raven Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit thy bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the Raven Nevermore. And the Raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him, streaming, throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. I just saw someone in chat say spitting bars. That's really funny. Oh, what a lovely poem that is. Again, I understand a lot of you will have studied this in school and probably are quite sick of it. Although, to be honest, for someone who had miraculously avoided the works of Edgar Allan Poe in my long years, I found this to be quite the interesting read. I really enjoyed it. I suppose you could say it's most likely about a man full of regret, and presumably Lenore is a woman he loved, who is now dead, whether this was his fault and why he's consumed with grief, and the raven being an omen or something. I don't quite know, but what I do know is that the way these bars are laid out is quite something, and it's easy to see why this has stood the test of time and lasted almost 200 years. So, why don't we move on? Let's find another Edgar Allan Poe poem to read. Does anyone have any suggestions? The Bible. Oh, that sounds interesting. Cask of Amontillado. That sounds interesting. Why don't we give that a try? The Cask of Amontillado. I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Oh, lovely. It's a little short story. It brings me a lot of joy that there are so many Poe heads in the chat that can help me out, because I'm terribly unfamiliar. I'm just a messenger. So, the Cask of Amontillado. Fortunato had hurt me 1,000 times, and I had suffered quietly. But then I learned that he lied. Oh my God! But then I learned that he had laughed at my proud name, Montresor. That's it. Montresor, the name of an old and honored family. I promised myself that I would make him pay for this, that I would have revenge. You must not suppose, however, that I spoke of this to anyone. I would make him pay, yes, but I would act only with the greatest care. I must not suffer as a result of taking my revenge. A wrong is not made right in that manner, and also the wrong would not be made right unless Fortunato knew that he was paying and knew who was forcing him to pay. I gave Fortunato no cause to doubt me, and continued to smile in his face, and he did not understand that I was now smiling at the thought of what I planned for him, at the thought of my revenge. Fortunato was a strong man, a man to be feared, but he had one great weakness. He liked to drink good wine, and indeed, he drank much of it. So he knew a lot about fine wines, and proudly believed that he was a trained judge of them. I, too, knew old wines well, and I bought the best that I could find. And wine, I thought, wine would give me my revenge. It was almost dark, one evening in the spring, when I met Fortunato in the street, alone. He spoke to me more warmly than was usual, for already he had drunk more wine than was good for him. I acted pleased to see him, and I shook his hand, as if he had been my closest friend. "Fortunato, how are you?" "Montresor, good evening, my friend." "My dear Fortunato, I am indeed glad that I have met you. I was just thinking of you, for I have been tasting my new wine. I have bought a new, full cask of a fine wine which they tell me is Amontillado. But, Amontillado, quite impossible. I know, it does not seem possible. As I could not find you, I was just going to talk to Lucrezi. If anyone understands wines, it is Lucrezi. Will he tell me? Lucrezi? He does not know one wine from another. But they say he knows as much about wines as you know. Oh, come. Let us go. Go where? To your vaults. To taste the wine. No, my friend, no. I can see that you are not well, and the vaults are cold and wet. I do not care. Let us go. I'm well enough. This cold is nothing, Amontillado. Someone is playing games with you. And Lucrezi, Lucrezi knows nothing about wines. Nothing at all. As he spoke, Fortunato took my arm, and I allowed him to hurry me to my great stone palace, where my family, the Montresors, had lived for centuries. There was no one at home. I had told the servants that they must not leave the palace, as I would not return until the following morning, and they must care for the place. This, I knew, was enough to make it certain that they would all leave as soon as my back was turned. I took down from their places on the wall 2 brightly burning lights. I gave one of these to Fortunato and led him to a wide doorway. There we could see the stone steps going down into the darkness. Asking him to be careful as he followed, I went down before him, down under the ground, deep under the old walls of my palace. We came finally to the bottom of the steps and stood there a moment together. The earth which formed the floor was cold and hard. We were entering the last resting place of the dead of the Montresor family. Here, too, we kept our finest wines, here in the cool, dark, still air, under the ground. Fortunato's step was not sure, because of the wine he had been drinking. He looked uncertainly around him, trying to see through the thick darkness which pushed in around us. Here, our brightly burning lights seemed weak indeed. but our eyes soon became used to the darkness. We could see the bones of the dead lying in large piles along the walls. The stones of the walls were wet and cold. From the long rows of bottles which were lying on the floor, among the bones I chose one which contained a very good wine. Since I did not have anything to open the bottle with, I struck the stone wall with it and broke off the small end. I offered the bottle to Fortunato. "Here, Fortunato, drink some of this fine Medoc. It'll help to keep us warm. Drink!" "Thank you, my friend. I drink to the dead who lie sleeping around us. And I, Fortunato, drink to your long life." "Ah, very fine wine indeed. But the Amontillado?" "It is farther on. Come, come." We walked on for some time. We were now under the river's bed, and water fell in drops upon us from above. Deeper into the ground we went, past still more bones. "Your vaults are many and large. There seems to be no end to them. We are a great family and an old one. It is not far now, but I can see you are trembling with the cold. Come, let us go back before it is too late." "Oh, it is nothing. Let us go on, but first, another drink of your Medoc." I took up from among the bones another bottle. It was another wine of a fine quality, a de Grave. Again, I broke off the neck of the bottle. Fortunato took it and drank it all without stopping for a breath. He laughed and threw the empty bottle over his shoulder. We went on, deeper and deeper into the earth, and finally we arrived at a vault in which the air was so old and heavy that our lights almost died. Against 3 of the walls there were piles of bones higher than our heads. From the 4th wall someone had pulled down all the bones, and they were spread all around us on the ground. In the middle of the wall was an opening into another vault, and I can call it that. A little room, about 3 feet wide, 6 or 7 feet high, and perhaps 4 feet deep. It was hardly more than a hole in the wall. "Go on," I said. "Go on. The Amontillado is in there." Fortunato continued to go forward, although uncertainly. Oh, excuse me. Soon, of course, he reached the back wall. He stood there a moment, facing the wall, surprised and wondering. In that wall were 2 heavy iron rings. A short chain was hanging from one of these, and a lock from the other. Before Fortunato could guess what was happening, I closed the lock and chained him tightly to the wall. I stepped back. "Fortunato," I said, "put your hand against the wall. You must feel how the water runs over it. Once more I ask you, please. Will you not go back?" "No." "If not, then I must leave you. But first, I must do everything I can for you." But the Amontillado." "Ah, yes, yes, indeed, the Amontillado." As I spoke these words, I began to search among the bones. Throwing them to one side, I found the stones which earlier I had taken down from the wall. Quickly, I began to build the wall again, covering the hole where Fortunato stood trembling. "Montresor, what are you doing?" I continued working. I could hear him pulling at the chain, shaking it wildly. Only a few stones remained to put in... Only a few stones remained to put in their place. Montresor. This is a very good joke indeed. Many times will we laugh about it, as we drink our wine together. Of course, as we drink the Amontillado. But it is not late. Should we not be going back? They will be expecting us. Let us go. Yes. Let us go. As I said this, I lifted the last stone from the ground. Montresor, for the love of God. Yes, for the love of God. I heard no answer. Fortunato, I cried. Fortunato. I heard only a soft, low sound, a half cry of fear. My heart grew sick. It must have been the cold. I hurried to force the last stone into its position, and I put the old bones again in a pile against the wall. For half a century now, no human hand has touched them. May he rest in peace. Ooh, what a dark story. I did enjoy that quite a lot. Oh, Meek is here. Is this the Lorax? I'm not sure if Dr. Seuss is public domain. If it is, I would absolutely read the Lorax. It's a classic. The Black Cat. Why don't we try that? There we are. The Black Cat. Well, this is a long one. This'll keep us entertained for a while. Right. This is Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat. For the most wild, yet homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me, yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than barocks. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found, which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive, in the circumstances I detail with awe, nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and events. Interesting already, isn't it? From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these, I spent most of my time, and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiar of character grew with my growth, and, in my manhood, I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find my wife in a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kinds. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. A small monkey? You really can tell this is an old story, isn't it? The latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. I should say he's talking about the cat, not the monkey. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than it happens, just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted, in this matter, for several years, during which my general temperament and character through the instrumentality of the friend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical altercation for the worse. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of mistreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when, by accident, or through affection, they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old, and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. The first story was The Raven, for someone who's asking in chat, and I'm very sorry. This story has taken such a dark turn. Don't feel bad if you'd like to sit out for this one. I think it's rather dark. One night, returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound, upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and more than a fiendish malevolence, gin-nurtured, thrilled every fibre of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When the reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse, for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. Now, this is very dark. Ooh. Again, a reminder, if any of you would like to sit out for this story, you're more than welcome to. Oh. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left, as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not sure that my soul lives. Then I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or stupid action for no other reason than because he knows he should not. Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it should be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue, and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the offending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck, and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in doing so, I was committing a sin, a deadly sin, that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. Hi, Demu, you joined at a very bad time. I've never read this one before. This is awful. On the night of the day on which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. The exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall, a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with every minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. We just hit 70k, woohoo! I really think we can hit 100k before the end of the year. That'd be incredible. Woo woo. They can't be sussy. Nah, the main character's sussy. He's awful. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length, reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of the fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd. By someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. Fire's getting a bit loud. I'm just gonna stoke that a tiny bit. Sort of nestle him, make him comfy. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, and then with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. That is so dark. Oh, goodness me, that imagery is amazing. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat, half stupefied, in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, and rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and, when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favourite of my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself was rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait, and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or, fastening its long and sharp claws in my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from so doing, partly it, yet by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss for how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. Excuse me. My wife had called my attention, more than once, to the character of the mark of white hair, of which I have spoken, and which had constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had, at length, assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows, oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and death. And now I was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man, fashioned in the image of a high god, so much of insufferable woe, alas! Neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former creature left me no moment alone, and, in the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while, from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day, she accompanied me, upon some household errand, into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the deep stairs, and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended, as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with the entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it into the well in the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. Yeah, what the hell is this MC trying to do? Ooh, I hope he gets his comeuppance in the end. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace thee at this point, insert the corpse, and wall the hole up as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. Sorry, that sentence took me a while to read. I think it's quite bizarrely worded. Surely just an artifact of time. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and, having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, while with little trouble I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus, for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again, I breathed as a freeman. The monster, in terror, had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted. But of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly, as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom, and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burdened to say if but one word, by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say, an excellently well-constructed house. These walls... Here you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand, upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than when I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were tolling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red, extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. Oh, what a story. Oh, what a story. That was very, very good, wasn't it? Particularly, because I've never read this before, particularly as I was reading it, I thought that, as implied, when he taps it, the bricks were just going to come down, you know, and that would be his comeuppance. Like, oh dear. Answered by a voice within the tomb. Ooh, goodness, chills. Oh, chills. What a story. What a story. That was remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Okay, everyone. We're about an hour in, and I've run out of tea. So I'm going to take a very short break, 5 minutes, to make myself a new cup of tea so you don't have to listen to my dry mouth, and then I'll return. And I think, as it's been suggested quite a few times, we'll be reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. So just give me a moment and I'll see you all in just a second. Hello. I'm not gone. I'm alive. I'm back. Got myself a new mug of tea. And, even better, I found an unopened bag of prawn crackers from Chinese takeaway that I got just a few days ago. And they were very nice. I may be picking little bits out of my teeth, so I hope that isn't disgusting for you. So, how have you all been feeling today? I need to... I said I was going to do so after the stream, but I really feel like I should look at some of these donations, because you all have been immensely generous. I'm going to look at some of the big ones. An hour ago, Sheska, $100. Merry Happy Christmas, my lord. Thank you for adding something a little extra special this Christmas for us, and I hope it's just as special day for yourself too. Super grateful for the different time zone friendly streams. Love ya. Thank you, Sheska. That means a lot to me, and yeah, I've been really enjoying streaming in an SEA or JP time zone, so I really hope it works out for you guys, and thank you so much for the 100. That's an immensely generous donation. Very, very, very generous. There was another one. Oh, Pico Utatane, $100. Merry Christmas, my lord. I hope you have a very lovely day. Thank you for keeping us all company on an otherwise lonely holiday. I love you, my starlight. That is very, very poignant of you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that $100. Salome has tipped $88. Happy holiday, my lord. Such a heartwarming surprise to hear you read this masterpiece by my favorite poet. Stay hydrated. Oh, and there's a lot more to come. There is a great deal more to come. We've also got, through Super Chat, 10,000 yen from, I can read that. Rikorisu? Rikorisu? Yeah, Rikorisu. Congrats on 70k, my lord. Big love for you. Thank you. That's 10,000 yen, which is an awful lot of money. Thank you ever so much. Those are the ones that I can summon right now. Not to distract from the beautiful holiday season and the ASMR. So, with that out of the way, I'm going to return to the stories. And I do promise that all donations made today will be read out in a Zatsdan in the next couple of days. So, next up is this one that was told to me by quickly, there's another one. Licha has tipped $100. We got $100 from Licha. Thank you ever so much. And they say, Daddy, mwah, mwah, chew. Thank you ever so much for that incredibly generous donation. The generosity today is wonderful, and I only hope you aren't putting yourselves out of pocket, because that is a lot of money to give. So, next of all, something from Pseudo C, who gave $10 to suggest this. Edgar Allan Poes, The Telltale Heart. The Telltale Heart. Ooh, got a very nice website for this. And it's quite long, so we're in for a treat. Alright then. This is The Telltale Heart by Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? Oh, excuse me. The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold, I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded. With what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon the bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern, cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man. Indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening my door little by little, and he had not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on to the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed fastened. Through fear of robbers, of course. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of terror, of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of a soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well, many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept. It has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. It's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions. But he had found it all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. Cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all of dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried, how steadily I could, maintain the ray upon the eye. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart might burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, Once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heartbeat went on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. The tub had caught all. Ha! Ha! When I had made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which rested the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but, ere long, I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone, rather. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but they still sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued, and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued. And it gained definitiveness, until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased. What could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Self-report. Oh my fucking God. Self-report. Self-report, everybody. A genuinely beautiful pair of stories, but I'm starting to notice a bit of a trend with Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. There seem to be... I have killed something and hidden it in my house, and when I'm being investigated, my own cockiness will wind up causing the thing that I have trapped to make a sound, which then gives me away. Which... I like the familiarity because they're very dark, and oh, the way this is written. I've never read this story in full before, but I've heard that last line before. Dissemble no more, I admit the deed, tear up the planks, here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Oh, so for those of you who don't know, we're reading various stories from Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. This one was called The Telltale Heart, and we've also been through The Raven, we've been through the Cask of... I can't remember how to say the name of the wine. Amontillado, that was it. And the Black Cat. And the Black Cat was very dark. I think the Black Cat was my favorite so far. That was very... Oh, God. Very, very good. It's literally the SpongeBob episode with the squeaky boots. They're here, under the floorboards. How about a mint? Oh, Annabel Lee is a love poem. That's a good one to go for next. A bit of a change of pace. Annabel Lee it is. Oh, it's nice and short as well. Okay. So this is Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was that reason that, long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cold, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, That was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Man! Oh, that was gonna be, like, really sweet, but it's, like, still dark. Jesus. Damn, that was really good. That was very good. Okay. Next up, do you guys have any other... Hey, Edgar, what the fuck, man? You in need of a talk? He probably was. It's probably where all of these poems came from. He probably never really had the chance to see a therapist or something, and so all of his problems just kind of wound up here, you know? Right. So, a demon within a dream. Or a dream within a dream. A dream within a dream. That sounds good. Edgar Allan Poe. A dream within a dream. Oh, this one's quite short as well. I've seen a lot of people talking about Eleonora as well, so I reckon we'll do that one next. Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow, you are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream, yet if hope has flown away, in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep. While I weep, oh God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? Oh God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? Oof, very, very good. Sort of speaking about a disconnection from reality, I suppose. Very, very well written. Oh, goodness me, I'm falling in love with Mr. Poe at this rate. So, Eleonora. This one's another short story. Nice, nice. About as long as the other two. Eleonora by Edgar Allan Poe. Published 1850. And there's a quote at the top. Sub conversation formae specificae salva anima. Raymond Lully. I am come of a race noted for vigor of fancy and ardor of passion. Men have called me mad, but the question is not yet settled whether madness is or is not the loftiest intelligence. whether much that is glorious, whether all that is profound, does not spring from disease of thought, from moods of mind exalted at the expense of the general intellect. They who dream by day are cognizant of many things which escape those who dream only by night. In their grey visions they obtain glimpses of eternity, and thrill in awakening to find that they have been upon the verge of the great secret. In snatches, they learn something of the wisdom which is good, and more of the mere knowledge which is evil. They penetrate, however, rudderless or compassless, into the vast ocean of the light ineffable, and again, like the adventures of the Nubian geographer, aggressi sunt mare tenebrarum quid in eo esset exploratiae. We will say, then, that I am mad. I grant, at least, that there are two distinct conditions of my mental existence. The condition of a lucid reason, not to be disputed, and belonging to the memory of events forming the first epoch of my life, and a condition of shadow and doubt appertaining to the present and to the recollection of what constitutes the second great era of my being. Therefore, what I shall tell of the earlier period believe, and to what I may relate of the later time, give only such credit as may seem due, or doubt it altogether, or, if doubt it ye cannot, then play unto its riddle the Oedipus. She whom I loved in youth, and whom I now pen, and of whom I now pen calmly and distinctly these remembrances, was the sole daughter of the only sister of my mother, long departed. Eleonora was the name of my cousin. Oh God. Oh God. Alright, you guys suggested it. We had always dwelt together beneath a tropical sun in the valley of the many-coloured grass. No unguided footstep ever came upon that chat's going mad, oh my God. No unguided footstep ever came upon that vale, for it lay away up among a range of giant hills that hung beetling around it, about it, shutting out the sunlight from its sweetest recesses. No path was trodden in its vicinity, and, to reach our happy home, there was no need of putting back, with force, the foliage of many thousands of forest trees, and of crushing to death the glories of many millions of fragrant flowers. Thus, it was that we lived alone, knowing nothing of the world without the valley, I and my cousin and her mother. From the dim regions, beyond the mountains at the upper end of our encircled domain, there crept out a narrow and deep river, brighter than all save the eyes of Eleonora, and, winding stealthily about in mazy courses, it passed away, at length, through a shadowy gorge, among hills still dimmer than those whence it had issued. We called it the River of Silence, for there seemed to be a hushing influence in its flow. No murmur arose from its bed, and so gently it wandered along, that the pearly pebbles upon which we loved to gaze, far down within its bosom, stirred not at all, but lay in a motionless content, each in its own old station, shining on gloriously forever. The margins of the river, and of the many dazzling rivulets that glided through the devious ways into its channel, as well as the spaces that extended from the margins away down into the depths of the streams until they reached the bed of pebbles at the bottom. These spots, no less than the whole surface of the valley, from the river to the mountains that girdled it in, were carpeted, all by a soft green grass, thick, short, perfectly even, and vanilla perfumed, but so besprinkled throughout with the yellow buttercup, the white daisy, the purple violet, and the ruby red asphodel, that its exceeding beauty spoke to our hearts in loud tones of the love and the glory of God. Also just seeing that someone in chat might have, yeah, we're going to need to time somebody out. Hold on. I'm very sorry, there's a bit of a dispute going on about language in chat, and I would very much like to remind that while it's not a rule on everyone's stream, it is a rule on mine that all languages are absolutely welcome. We're actually, at the moment, we're looking into hiring mods who are fluent in multiple languages so that we can properly moderate this, because I understand that I have lots of viewers from different parts of the world. So I don't blame anyone for getting this wrong, but please remember, be respectful to people no matter which language they choose to speak. All right? Moving on. And here and there, in groves about this grass, like wilderness of dreams, sprang up fantastic trees, whose tall, slender stems stood not upright, but slanted gracefully toward the light that peered at noonday in the center of the valley. Their mark was speckled with the vivid alternate splendor of ebony and silver, and was smoother than all save the cheeks of Eleonora, so that, but for the brilliant green of the huge leaves that spread from their summits in long, tremulous lines, dallying with the zephyrs, one might have fancied them giant serpents of Syria doing homage to their sovereign, the sun. Hold on a minute, it's actually getting quite warm in this cabin. Hand in hand about this valley, for 15 years roamed I with Eleonora, before love entered within our hearts. It was one evening at the close of the 3rd lustrum of her life, and the 4th of my own, that we sat, locked in each other's embrace beneath the serpent-like trees, and looked down within the water of the river of silence at our images therein. We spoke no words during the rest of that sweet day, and our words, even upon the morrow, were tremulous and few. We had drawn the god Eros from that wave, and now we felt that he had enkindled within us the fiery souls of our forefathers. The passions which had for centuries distinguished our race came thronging with the fancies for which they had been equally noted, and together breathed a delirious bliss over the valley of the many-coloured grass. A change fell upon all things. Strange, brilliant flowers, star-shaped, burn out upon the trees, where no flowers had been known before. The tints of the green carpet deepened, and when, one by one, the white daisies shrank away, there sprang up in place of them 10 by 10 of the ruby-red asphodel, and life arose in our paths, for the tall flamingo, hitherto unseen, with all gay glowing birds, flaunted his scarlet plumage before us. The golden and silver fish haunted the river, out of the bosom of which issued little by little a murmur that swelled, at length, into a lulling melody more divine than that of the harp of Aeolus, sweeter than all save the voice of Eleonora. And now, too, a voluminous cloud, which we had long watched in the regions of Hesper, floated out thence, all gorgeous in crimson and gold, and settling in peace above us, sank day by day lower and lower, until its edges rested upon the tops of mountains, turning all their dimness into magnificence, and shutting us up, as if forever, within a magic prison of grandeur and glory. The loveliness of Eleonora was that of the seraphim, but she was a maiden, artless and innocent as the brief life she had led among the flowers. No guile disguised the fervour of love which animated her heart, and she examined with me its inmost recesses as we walked together in the valley of the many-coloured grass. The valley of the many-coloured grass. And discoursed of the mighty changes which had lately taken place therein. At length, having spoken one day, in tears, of the last sad change which must befall humanity, she thenceforward dwelt only upon this one sorrowful theme, interweaving it into all our converse, as in the songs of the bard of Shiraz. The same images are found occurring, again and again, in every impressive variation of phrase. She had seen that the finger of death was upon her bosom, that, like the ephemeron, she had been made perfect in loveliness only to die, but the terrors of the grave, to her, lay solely in a consideration which she revealed to me one evening at twilight by the banks of the river of silence. She grieved to think that, having entombed her in the valley of the many-coloured grass, I would quit forever its happy recesses, transferring the love which was now so passionately her own, to some maiden of the outer and everyday world. And then and there I threw myself hurriedly at the feet of Eleonora, and offered up a vow to herself and to heaven that I would never bind myself in marriage to any daughter of earth, that I would in no manner prove recreant to her dear memory, or to the memory of the devout affection with which she had blessed me. And I called the mighty ruler of the universe to witness the pious solemnity of my vow, in the curse which I invoked of him and of her as saint in illusion, should I prove traitorous to that promise, involved in a penalty the exceeding great horror of which will not permit me to make record of it here. And the bright eyes of Eleonora grew brighter at my words, and she sighed, as if a deadly burthen had been taken from her breast, and she trembled and very bitterly wept, but she made acceptance of the vow, for what was she but a child? And it made easy to her the bed of her death. And she said to me, not many days afterward, tranquilly dying, that, because of what I had done for the comfort of her and her spirit, she would watch over me in that spirit when departed, and, if so, were permitted her to return to me visibly in the watches of the night. But if this thing were indeed beyond the power of the souls in paradise, that she would at least give me a frequent indications of her presence, sighing upon me in the evening winds, or filling the air which I breathed with perfume from the censers of the angels. And, with these words upon her lips, she yielded up her innocent life, putting an end to the first epoch of my own. Thus far, I have faithfully said. But as I pass the barrier in time's path, formed by the death of my beloved, and proceed with the second era of my existence, I feel that a shadow gathers over my brain, and I mistrust the perfect sanity of the record. But let me on. Years drag themselves along heavily, and still I dwelled within the valley of the many-coloured grass. But a second change had come upon all things. The star-shaped flowers shrank into the stems of the trees and appeared no more. The tints of the green carpet faded, and, one by one, the ruby-red asphodels withered away, and there sprang up, in place of them, 10 by 10, dark, eye-like violets, that writhed uneasily and were ever encumbered with dew. And life departed from our paths, for the tall flamingo flaunted no longer his scarlet plumage before us, but sadly flew from the vale into the hills with all the gay glowing birds that had arrived in his company, and the golden and silver fish swam down through the gorge at the lower end of our domain and bedecked the sweet river Never Again, and the lulling melody that had been softer than the wind harp of Aeolus, and more divine than all save the voice of Eleonora. It died, little by little, away, in murmurs, growing lower and lower, until the stream returned, at length, utterly, into the solemnity of its original silence, and then, lastly, utterly, the voluminous cloud uprose and, abandoning the tops of the mountains to the dimness of old, fell back into the regions of Hesper, and took away all its manifold golden and gorgeous glories from the valley of the many-coloured grass. Yet the promises of Eleonora were not forgotten, for I heard the sounds of swinging of the censers of the angels, and streams of a holy perfume floated ever and ever about the valley, and at lone hours, when my heart beat heavily, the winds that bathed my brow came unto me laden with soft sighs, and indistinct murmurs filled often the night air, and once, oh but once only, I was awakened from a slumber, like the slumber of death, by the pressing of spiritual lips upon my own. But the void within my heart refused, even thus, to be filled. I longed for the love which had before filled it to overflowing. At length, the valley pained me through its memories of Eleonora, and I left it for ever for the vanities and the turbulent triumphs of the world. I found myself within a strange city, where all things might have served to blot from recollection the sweet dreams I had dreamed so long in the valley of the many-coloured grass. The pomps and pageantries of a stately court, and the mad clangor of arms, and the radiant loveliness of women, bewildered and intoxicated my brain, but as yet my soul had proved true to its vows, and the indications of the presence of Eleonora were still given me in the silent hours of the night. Suddenly, these manifestations, they ceased, and the world grew dark before mine eyes, and I stood aghast at the burning thoughts which possessed, the terrible temptations which beset me, for there came from some far, far distant and unknown land, into the gay court of the king I served, a maiden to whose beauty my whole recreant heart yielded at once, at whose footstool I bowed down without a struggle, in the most ardent, in the most abject worship of love. What indeed was my passion for the young girl of the valley, in comparison with the fervor, and the delirium, and the spirit-lifting ecstasy of adoration, with which I poured out my whole soul in tears at the feet of the ethereal Ermengarde. Oh, bright was the seraph Ermengarde, and in that knowledge I had no room for any other. Oh, divine was the angel Ermengarde, and as I looked down into the depths of her memorial eyes, I thought only of them, and of her. I wedded, nor dreaded the curse I had invoked, and its bitterness was not visited upon me, and once, but once again, in the silence of the night, there came through my lattice the soft sighs which had forsaken me, and they modelled themselves into a familiar, sweet voice, saying, "Sleep in peace, for the spirit of love reigneth, reigneth and ruleth, and, in taking to thy passionate heart her who is Ermengarde, thou art absolved, for reasons which shall be made known to thee in heaven, of thy vows unto Eleonora." Wow, that was an interesting story. I like that it I quite liked the direction it took and how it sort of it was almost like it was his way of moving on from someone that he might have loved in the past, and how I think that when we're in love, it's very easy to make promises that are like, and all of that kind of stuff, and then life goes on and that sort of thing. So this is a very mature story from Mr. Allan Poe, and I quite like it. I really, really do. Anyway, I hate to say it, but that is going to be all for me this morning. I think we'll quickly read a few donations, and then I'll head off at around the 2-hour mark. This was a really, really nice stream, and I am going to be doing another one this evening. This evening, sort of more applicable for EST time, 10 p.m. GMT. I'm going to be reading a story that I know is very applicable to the current time period. It's going to be Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Thanks for understanding, everybody. I would have liked to go for longer, but I need to rest my throat. I need to rest my voice, rest my weary soul, and progress with some other odd jobs that need taken care of. Let's have a look at what we've got. So we also got from Nagi, we got from Snowdrop, $55. Thank you, Vox. But do demons all celebrate Christmas? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, to be honest, I haven't met many demons. Although I know I do. I like Christmas. Having spent so many hundreds of years among humans, I think that Christmas in itself is quite something I wouldn't want to live without. So yes, maybe not all demons do, but I do. We just got $50 from, I was told the other day that I was pronouncing your name wrong. Is it Shu Chen? Or is it Kian? I'm not sure. But Shu, not the Shu that I know, but a different Shu, has said, Dear Vox, it's my birthday today. Could you give me some benediction? It's COVID in US, and I cannot meet any friends for birthday nor Christmas. Thank you for your stream today, and Merry Christmas to you. Is it close enough? Oh, thank goodness. Yeah, I'm very, very sorry that you've been having a rough time, but I promise you it's going to be okay. All you have to do is focus on the future and remember that this horrible long nightmare won't last for much longer, okay? So please stay calm and remember that you're loved and your family will be excited to see you. Or your friends or family will be excited to see you when they can. Just got 1,500 NT dollars, also Taiwanese dollars from Jay. Many, many loves from Taiwan. That's incredibly generous of you. Thank you ever so much. We've also got 750 Taiwanese dollars from Jay. For me, it's the best Christmas gift. You really encourage me to learn more English just to understand all your readings and to praise you more. That makes me very, very happy. And to be honest, I can imagine to a lot of you, you may have found the language in this poetry a little bit overwhelming if you are just learning English, but I'd like to promise you that so am I. A lot of this language was also very unfamiliar to me. I was around at a time when this language was being used, but I don't think I was living near where this was commonplace, and so a lot of these words were quite confusing to me, and I imagine for people who aren't fluent English speakers this would be very confusing. So I want to say to all of you who do not have English as a first language, you've been doing extremely well to keep up today, and I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about English, and I hope that I can continue teaching you tiny bits as we go on. Goodness me, the generosity today is quite overwhelming. I have to say thank you so much. Also, just because I made a mistake and I read their name out, Nagi, $5. It's kind of getting colder in China, so please take care of yourself. Girls may feel, okay. Can I ask for a demon's gentle comfort to alleviate pain? I think my spirit will be relieved. Of course. I'm really sorry that you're going through some pains right now. It's upsetting, and I don't really understand. As a man, I don't really understand what that pain could be like, but I know that it'll pass, And I really hope that throughout this stream you've been able to kind of distract yourself from it and to feel a little bit more calm. So thank you very much for the $5, and I really hope that things feel okay for you. All right, Luxiem is very popular in China, it seems. It's quite heartwarming, isn't it? Okay, that's all from me. I'm going to head off, so I'll see you all another time. Thank you all, and please remember, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.